So the next section, we're going to look at some of the overviews, or we're going to look at some major structures and components of the immune system. So leukocytes, which we've covered with the blood section, they're formed in the red bone marrow, and we have three different types of granulocytes. This is all review material for y'all: neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, which can become macrophages, and lymphocytes, which are our T and B cells, and also our natural killer cells, which we're going to learn. I remember whenever we did blood, I told y'all that we would learn about these later, and this is the chapter where we learn about them. So most of our structures that house our immune cells, most of our immune cells are not found in the blood, but in other structures like our lymph tissue, which we talked about previously, some select organs like our spleen, epithelial and mucosal membranes, like the membranes that we have in our digestive tract that are going to line the digestive tract. We all have some immune cells there that are going to help cleanse materials as they enter into our body from our digestive tract, and also in our connective tissue, where we'll have macrophages that help keep our body clean in our connective tissue and everything. Lymph tissue itself is comprised of lymph nodes, the spleen, tonsils, the mucosal associated lymphatic tissues like the ones found in our mucosal membranes here, and lymph nodes or nodules, which are the little, whenever you have a lymph node, the nodules are going to be the little small subsections of the node. And so that's what the lymph nodules are. In this tissue, we'll have many T and B cells, many macrophages, and also we'll have our natural killer cells stored within these tissues. So some of the select organs that we have that store these, they're in many different areas. We name them based on their location. So we talked about macrophages that we had in our lungs. And so we'll have alveolar macrophages in there. We'll have microglia, which are going to help keep or destroy infectious agents whenever they enter our brain or neural tissue. Some of these are permanent residents, and so these are called fixed macrophages. And these are macrophages that stay in a singular place and keep things clean as they pass by. Some of them wander around as wandering macrophages, and these are going to constantly be moving. Sometimes they're going to travel towards chemicals or sites of bacterial infection, so these will help there. So our epithelial layers of our skin and mucosal membranes, we're going to have several different types of cells here, and one of the important ones is dendritic cells. And so you haven't seen the term dendritic cells. These are a type of cell that's derived from monocytes, and what they function very much like macrophages, or they are macrophages. They engulf pathogens that are found in our skin and our mucosal membranes, like in our digestive system. And so if this was a macrophage, and we have a bacteria with antigens on it, this macrophage is going to eat this bacteria, right? It's going to come get it. So inside of the macrophage, it's going to digest this, and it's going to break it apart into all the individual components. And so those antigens that we had found right here on the surface of this bacteria, this dendritic cell is going to digest these and then send these antigens out. So this antigen then travels, and it'll come up to the surface of its own cell right here, and so it will express this antigen, and this is whenever this is called a dendritic cell, or an antigen presenting cell, and so it will present these antigens for the other parts of our immune system to recognize and help fight against that pathogen. These migrate to our lymph node, they move through our lymph vessels, and we also find them in the mucosal membranes. So here we'll have the connective tissue cells. So here we'll have some mast cells, which are going to be like fixed cells that are going to help keep it clean. They work very close to blood vessels, and so whenever we have this area that's going to have blood coming in or around it, it's going to have mast cells or macrophages that are going to help keep this area clean. It's very abundant in our dermis, or in our layers of underneath our skin, the connective tissue in there, and also in the mucosa of several of our different structures, different organ tracts. And so also remember like endomysium or the muscle fibers, the sheaths of the muscle fibers. This is where we will find these structures as well, or these lymph system structures. So this slide right here shows us a lot of these different cells. So here we can see there's a review of the different type of leukocytes. This is a review of our lymph system, and so this is an image of a lymph node or a lymph tissue. Here is one of the macrophages that are in our lungs. Here's a dendritic cell in our epithelial tissue of our mucosal membranes, and so they're going to move around and destroy pathogens that way. And here is just what they would look like throughout our body. So we'd have these mast cells that are macrophages within just the connective tissue surrounding our body or around our body. Here. So cytokines are a different structure, and we can think of them as being very similar to hormones. They do very similar things. They're used as means of cellular communication. These are soluble proteins, which means that they can dissolve in water and they can move around our body or get transmitted around our body. And these help out both of our innate and adaptive immune system. And so we're going to introduce these two terms in a minute, but right now we're just going to call them innate and adaptive, and we'll get some definitions for them. So if y'all remember anything about the endocrine system, you might remember that we talked about autocrine and paracrine. And so these are going to be cells or hormones or cytokines that can act on the cell itself that releases it, on local cells, which would be a paracrine, or they can circulate within our blood and cause systemic actions, which would be endocrine. So since these things are just secreted, they don't secrete into ducts, so this is why they're endocrine cells. And cytokines typically have a very short half-life, so they don't exist for very long. They just exist long enough to get some kind of action. So some of the different types of examples of actions are right here. These can be means of regulating our immune system activity. So if we have cells secreting cytokines, sometimes this means that we need to increase the activity of our immune system. And so this enables or activates immune reactions. These are sometimes means of communication between cells. So if one cell is infected by a virus, for example, it will secrete cytokines that tell other cells surrounding it not to replicate themselves, to shut down replication machinery inside of the cell. And so this will prevent the viruses from being able to replicate more. Sometimes they control the behavior of the effector cells, or the cells that bring about effects of our immunity. They can regulate inflammatory responses, so they can increase inflammation or decrease inflammation if they go away. These can be weapons, so some of these will be chemicals that we're going to use to put on pathogens, and that will destroy their cells themselves, like usually by disrupting or destroying the cell membranes. And we'll talk about some examples of these. And these also can influence our non-immune cells, which, for example, like our nervous system. And so it can bring about actions in our nervous system. And so here's some examples of different cytokines. And so here we've got the different categories of cytokines that we can see, what their primary function is, where they come from, and then what we can call them, or some examples of some of these. So y'all can go ahead and you can pause the video and you can look through some of these, but these are going to just stimulate specific actions. And so this kind of summarizes or gives examples for the previous slide. So this is where we talk about our two different parts or categories of our immune system. I mentioned this a couple of slides ago, and so now we're going to describe it. So we're going to have these two separate immune systems or separate immune categories that are going to act simultaneously. And so these are occurring all the time in our body, both of them. The first one is our innate immunity, and the second one is our adaptive immunity. And so if you try to think about what the word innate means, you might come up with things like natural, or it just happens. It's things that our body just does. They're characteristics of our body that we don't have to learn to respond to pathogens. Adaptive immunity, on the other hand, is where we're going to have specific reactions for specific pathogens. And so, for example, if we encounter a pathogen and then we start making antibodies for it, this is an example of adaptive immunity. And so this y'all, this is similar to like what we heard or remember with Rh factor in our blood. Whenever we are exposed to that Rh antigen, we make antibodies for it. And so this is kind of an example of our adaptive immunity, where we'll have specialized cells to defeat or to fight against those antigens. And so there's going to be a difference in time for each of these to respond. So our innate immunity, as I mentioned before, are just characteristics of ourselves. So these do not require any time to be activated. They just are naturally occurring things that our body does. For example, our skin. Our skin doesn't have to be skin sometimes, right? It's skin all the time, and this is going to help prevent pathogens from being able to enter our body. We'll also have mucosal membranes, like in our digestive tract, that prevent entrance into our body from our digestive system. And then that would be our external defenses. We also have internal defenses, such as our macrophages or neutrophils, some chemicals that we're going to go into specific details about, or actions like inflammations and fever. And so we'll talk about how each of those help defend against pathogens.